Happy second Sabbath of a brand new year. How many of you made resolutions this year? How many? Raise your hands nice and be proud about that. Made a resolution. That's more than the rest of us did. How many of you who raised your hand are still on track? All right, good for you, good for you. Because isn't that kind of, again, we talked about last week about the starting, this fresh start of a new year seems to give us, and while it's an arbitrary line, it is a very much needed line. It's a line that all cultures have, this idea of a fresh start, a beginning again, a chance to hit that reset button and try to change our narrative. Trying to get on track, trying to get that thing fixed in our life that we've been trying for so many years and so long. And last week I told you the big underlying theme for this whole Next Right Step 2020 is not that. So Pedro, you want to help me out there, buddy? Begin with the end in mind, right? And that's why the first slide says the Next Right Step 2020, because it's not about what we want to accomplish this year, it's where we want to be next year at this time. And so we got to begin with the end in mind, and if we begin with the end in the mind, the next step is to work back from there. And you probably have thought about this. You know, I'd like to, oftentimes this time of the year, people talk about, I want to lose some weight. How much weight? 35 pounds. How much? 17, all right, 17, that's lower than 35. But, you know, you have a number, right? And you kind of, I don't want to put the number, but that's where I want to get to, and I got to work back from that. And you begin to do that. You know, this is the time, January is the best month if you are a fitness club owner, because this is when you make like 90% of your money is in January. Because people come and they give you that money, and they're ready. You know, and I told you last week, you know, you ladies, you go out and you buy those cute little outfits, right? You know, because you're going to look good in the gym. And you buy it like a size or too small because you want to have it look good for when you get there, a little incentive, right? And then it gets hung on that clothes rack you have in your bedroom called the treadmill, right? Because it's just, you know, we have all this, and all of us share this one thing that, at least for a lot of us, is the thing that holds us back from really getting to where we want to be. And it's a tough thing, and it's a real thing. In fact, there's a guy in the Bible, a guy named Solomon, who was purported to be the smartest man, at least at that stage, who'd ever lived, because he had these great insights. In fact, he wrote a whole part of the Bible that you have called Proverbs, these observations of life. They're not promises, they're not, if you do this, this happens, but as I look at life, this is kind of how things tend to go, right? This happens, and then that happens. And so he actually wrote another book, a very depressing book by the name of Ecclesiastes. If you're prone to depression, do not read this book in the Bible. And I am telling you that as your friend, right? Because I struggle with depression, and this is not a good book to read. You know, you think, Pastor, tell me not to read the Bible? I'm just looking out for your health, all right? Because very pessimistic view of stuff. But he has some great insights. Even in his pessimism, he's still a bright guy. I love what he says here. Those who wait for perfect weather, that is, those who watch the wind, will never plant any seed. They'll never sow, right? Those who look at every cloud will never harvest crops. And maybe to put it in a simple way that we understand it, if you wait for everything to be perfect, you will never do anything. And for some of us, that's our thing, isn't it? Because we want to get just everything just right? I got to get my workout worked out. I got to get my meal plan worked out, which means I got to cook all this meal, get all this stuff. And a lot of you went out and bought a lot of fresh vegetables for your refrigerator. I said for your refrigerator because that's where it's still sitting, right? You know, and you have all these plans, but everything isn't just quite right. You know, you woke up and there's this thing in you, the first morning you wake up, I'm going to get up earlier to be able to go to the gym, and you woke up earlier and you thought to yourself, oh, I don't want to get up yet. It's cold. You know, you flip back the covers, oh no, it's cold. Or you begin to negotiate, we all negotiate with ourselves, right? 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes. And in 5 more minutes, what happens? We've become skilled negotiators, that's right. 5 more minutes, and then you look at the clock, and now it's not enough time. Oh, so maybe I'll start tomorrow, right? It's that next big step. In fact, it doesn't matter if you're a religious person or not. It's kind of a shared experience. That for some of us, that is the hardest thing, that big step. In fact, there's a great story in the Bible that we're going to look at today that talks about this idea of how important that step is, and even some of the challenges that revolve around it. But before we go to that story, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, I thank you for a new year and the promise and the hope that it holds out for us of a new start. And there's some of us in this room, in this space today, some of us watching online today, that desperately need a new start. We wish we could go back and change things. We wish we could begin again. We wish we could forget. And while that may not be an option, I'm thankful today, at least for myself, to be able to say I know that there's still an option of what happens today and what happens tomorrow. And to trust that you can change a life and change a direction, that you can change a dream, that you can change a hope, and that you can even change us. And so in this new year, with that underlying theme of so many of our lives, to experiencing a new and different reality, a better reality than we've had, I ask you again to enter not only into this space, this sacred room, but more importantly into the sacred lives that sit in this room today. And that you become the author of that story. That you really take what you've started and finish in us, and that you would bump us and nudge us and move us and invite us to take that next step that we need to take with you and with those things in our lives that would make our lives so much better. And so we give you the space today to remind us of this old story of how you worked in the life of your people, and to give us a glimpse of how you might even work today in the lives of your people. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we'll be over in the book of Joshua, chapter 3. Joshua is a guy of one of two people, Joshua and Caleb, who are the only two people that came, that were alive, of the generation that left Egypt on the way to the promised land. If you're not real familiar with the Bible, you may remember the story of the Israelites being the children of God and in slavery in Egypt. Maybe you watched that great Ten Commandments movie around Easter time, where the Charlton Heston was in this great, look, and, he has all these plagues and stuff. But it's this miraculous thing that God gets his people who've been in slavery over 400 years. They have had literally generations of slaves. And God says, I'm going to take my people, let my people go. And so they get out, and then they get trapped because the Egyptians let them go, but then they track them down, and now the people don't know what to do. And if you read that story, it's this consistent story of everything's great with God, everything's terrible with God. Why God? Why God? Why God? Why God makes a miraculous way? Hey, thank you, God. Next day, why God? Why God? Why? Up and down, and we understand that, right? It's not in the up times that we ask those questions, why God, right? You have never asked God, why God, when you got a raise. You have never asked God, why God, that when you went out in your car, didn't start yesterday, today it starts. You never said, oh, why God, why? Oh, why me, right? You've never asked why God when he asked you out, or when she said yes to that ask God, right? It's in those tough times that we begin to ask God. And that's the story of Israel every day. Oh, why God, why God? And so finally, this whole thing that God decides that this group of people cannot be the people he takes into the promised land. And he doesn't kill them all off. They just die off of old age mostly, but some other things that happen that over this time. But when it gets down to it, Caleb and Joshua are the only two guys left. And Joshua has now become the leader because Moses has died as well. And so if you go back and read the first chapter of Joshua, it's this idea that now he's become the leader, and God says, got to be courageous. You're my man. You're going to lead my people. Second chapter talks about that he sends some spies, and we talked about this at Christmas time. One of Jesus' ancestors in his ancestral tree, a lady by the name of Rahab. Remember that story? Kind of a weird person to have in your genealogy that you would talk about, but they talked about her. Second chapter talks about spies go see her. She gives the whole story. They get back. They come back to Joshua and say, everything's great. These people are afraid of us. We can take this. It was this encouragement to them that they could actually enter the promised land, because this was not going to be like so often with us is. It's not simply just take that step and everything works out. But to go into the promised land, they had to do some stuff. They were going to have some resistance. They were going to have to work for it, because God knows that sometimes in the working for it, that something happens in our lives. And so that's where we come in chapter 3. And it says, early the next morning, after these spies have gotten back, Joshua and all the Israelites left Acacia. They leave this place and they go. And they travel to the Jordan River, and that's an important piece, because the Jordan River is the separation between where they're at and where they want to be. That's the promised land over here. Right now, they're on the other shore. They're separated. And there are probably some Jordan rivers in your life, right? Some of you are waiting for that interview, right? That's the river. That's the river you're waiting to get across. Maybe you're waiting for that letter in the mail. Maybe you're waiting for that call from your doctor to tell you whether or not you're going to cross that line. So they find themselves at this edge of the Jordan River, and they camp there before crossing, which I love is this part of the story because it simply says they didn't get the news that everything's great, and they went right away, and they stopped for a chance to really think about what was going to take place. And sometimes we need that moment to stop and think about what might take place. Consider where we might be and work back from that, and that's where they sit now. In fact, the writer of Joshua goes on and says that they sit there for 3 days. And then after 3 days, the leaders go to the camp and they give these orders to this group of people. And this people, on the conservative estimates, maybe 1 million, big estimates, maybe 3-4 million. I mean, this is a ton of people. And they say this: when you see the priests and Levites carrying the Ark of the Agreement, that is the Ark of the Covenant, with the Lord your God, leave where you are and follow it. So when you see the priest, they all kind of pick this up, it's on this big line, everybody gets it up and they begin to walk, you ought to follow it. And I love the reason they give why they ought to follow it. That way you will know which way to go. Since you have never been here, you've never passed this way before. Because let's face it, if you had, let's say, 1 million people, and the first people get off track and everybody else is following just the people in front of them, you could get in big trouble, right? So pay attention, especially you in the front. Watch where they go, and you guys follow them, because you've never been here before. You don't know how to get there. Just follow where God's leading you. He goes on and says, listen, make yourselves holy. And when he talks about that, it's not like about them having to do something to, I got to make myself holy. But it's the idea of consecrated. That's why they'd spent 3 days there, and why they were waiting, was to think about what was going to take place. To make sure everything was right between them and God. And when I say right, not to be perfect, but just to make sure that they were ready for what God was going to do. Because he says tomorrow the Lord is going to do some amazing, some miraculous things among you. And that's important to know, because these people had seen miraculous things multiple times in their life. But just like us, who at times have seen some miraculous, some things we cannot explain in our lives, there are times when we forget those things. So sometimes to consecrate ourselves, to stop and to think back where God has been, and if he's been there before, he'll be here again. So they wait. And then Joshua, he talks to the priests, the guys who are going to pick up this ark and lead them, and he says, listen, you take the Ark of the Agreement, of the covenant, and you go ahead of the people. All right, you pick it up and you go to the edge of the Jordan River, and then you stand in the water. Which is one of those days people like you ought to be happy you're not people like me. Because I got to go in the water first. But Joshua says, hey, this is what you guys do. Pick it up, carry it out, and you step into this river. This flowing river, this deep river. And it gets better, actually, as it goes on. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, here is the proof that the living God is with you, that he's among you, and that he will force, that he will drive out the Canaanites. Here's the proof. This is the proof. The priest will carry the ark of the Lord into the Jordan ahead of you, and when they step into the water, it will, what's that word? That's your proof. When they put their foot in the water will stop. It'll be like a dam, but there will be no dam that they built. It just stops. That's going to be your sign. Now, you may think, well, a better sign might have been to build a bridge, right? Better bridge might have been to have an escalator on that bridge, because you got millions of people. Let's get them across fast, right? But for them to walk towards this river and to watch these priests put their feet in the water, every time I read the story, I always wonder where would you have liked to have been in that line of priests? Because there's probably a dozen or so that are carrying this ark. It's a big thing. You want to be the guys at the very front? Or you guys want to be at the back? How many of you would like to be at the front? Raise your hands. All right. How many of you like to be at the back? How many of you don't want to be in the back, but you want to be in the middle, so you're not at the back? Anybody else? Yeah. I think our answer to that tells us a lot about just our own wiring, just our own personalities, right? Some of us are the kind of people that just want to dive in at the start. Woo, we'll be first. Some of us are like, no, I'll wait. I'm good, right? I'll go after a couple of people gone, then I'll go in. Some of us are like, I'm going to wait till everybody's gone and make sure everybody survived. I want to be there. And what I love about the story is that it isn't sort of like, oh, no, everybody's got it. There's this line. But being that first priest had to be a little bit of a moment, right? Because this water's raging. In fact, I don't want to stop. It's during the harvest that the Jordan overflows the river. So this isn't just like the regular river, as bad as that would have been. This is like flood level river. And if you've ever been around a river that's flooding, it's not like this peace, calm, go have a picnic by it kind of moment, right? Skip rocks because it's so smooth. It's just ugly and it's brown and it's churning. And to be the first guy to go, okay, to step in. But that's going to be miraculous to stop this at flood range. So Joshua writes, he says that when the priests carrying the ark came to the edge of the river and they stepped into the water is upstream has stopped flowing. In fact, the story will tell us not only does it stop flowing, that they will walk out into the middle of the river, wait there as all the hundreds of thousands of millions of people pass along, and they walk along on dry ground. They stand there in the middle of the ground. And they wait while all the people walk across it. And here's what comes out of this event. All the kings of the Amorites and the Canaanite kings living by the Mediterranean Sea heard that the Lord had dried up the Jordan River. Because news would have gotten around, right? News would have gotten around because upriver, someplace that water has got to go. Right? So it's flowing someplace. And it's causing some disturbance. It's causing some issue. When the word gets out, what's going on? How does water back up like that? That doesn't make sense. And the word is, it's the Israelites, And their God has done something. And after all these people hear this, they were scared. Their hearts melted, and they are too afraid to face the Israelites. I love the literal language. There was no spirit left in them. See, this miracle wasn't just for God's people to get from one side of the river to the other. And this wasn't just for them to know that God was active in their lives so that they could get across that river. This miracle wasn't just for God's people, it was for every people. To let them know that there was a God, and there is a God, who does unexplainable stuff at times. And when you can't explain something, it normally makes us stop and think, that's hard to figure out. That's hard to grasp. And to know especially that these people are now on your side of the river, and you've heard talk about this promised land, and that you happen to be living in their promised land, and they're coming back to get this promised land, that is probably not going to go so great for you over time. And here's the point I want you to take away today. I will only know what God can do and will do if I do. Say that with me. I will only know what God and if. I know it's terrible English, so English teachers, do not write me. You figured out by now I'm not great at English language. But it's true, isn't it? And some of us have experienced this, the truth of this. That the only time that we can really know what God can and will do is when we've stepped into that water. When we've taken that first step. Because we all know that first step is really the hardest step, isn't it? And the next step after it is the next hardest, right? But once you get a few steps going, that momentum takes you. Newton's laws of physics, right? Remember what the first law is? How many of you know what the first law is? Oh man, I was hoping more of you knew it. Good news is I can tell you whatever it is and you won't know if I'm right or wrong. These first laws have this idea about that when something is just sitting, it most likely will stay sitting unless something moves it, right? And when something is moving, it most likely will keep moving until something stops it. That's the dumbing down version of it, right? Yeah, it's coming back to, yeah. But think of that picture and how much it applies to life, how much it applies to those things that are going on, the things that you hope this year will be different for you. Because whatever that thing is, most likely, you are like this right now. You are an object that is not in motion. And the issue has always been to get that object in motion. And it's hard to get that object in motion because there's so many things that conspire against it. We all have rivers in our lives, right? Some of you have rivers right now that are overflowing their banks. And it's scary. But that step, if we will, for those of us in this room and those watching online that consider ourselves, people of faith, that step of faith, right? It's something Jesus talks an awful lot about. If you have faith, and when he talks about if you have faith, he's not talking about having this kind of faith that believes everything. He talks about just having some faith that leans towards him. And in that leaning towards him, maybe you get a little nudge from him and that begins the motion that moves you, that gets you rolling, that gets you moving in that direction, that makes it harder to slow down, harder to stop things. Like Jesus one time will say, we always read these stories of Jesus and all these miracles he did. But there's a passage that's hidden in all these stories about Jesus that says, in this one area, Jesus didn't stay there very long because he couldn't do very many miracles because the people didn't have faith. And again, it wasn't great faith that he's talking about. It's just this idea of maybe that God can and will do. But I have to lean in towards that. Martin Luther King Jr. grabbed this greatly when he said that faith is taking that first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. Which, if you've ever been up, you have a dark house and you're upstairs and you've been woken up. How many of you ever had that lovely, life-changing experience of a smoke alarm in the basement going off in the middle of the night? Anybody else out there? Oh, you should try this one time in your life. Especially about 2:30 in the morning after you've been asleep for about 4 or 5 hours. It blares and you hit the top of the steps. And faith is taking that first step. Because when you get old like me, your legs don't quite bend all the way yet, and the first thing in the morning, you hope that first step happens and then the second step happens. It's what the great Chinese philosopher said, that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? It's that step. And it's that step that can be so hard for us, but it's that step that allows God to do something that he can't do without us taking that step towards him, that step of faith. So here's my question. What's the next right step for you? What's that step that you need to take that will change that narrative? What's that step that maybe you've been trying to take for a long time but just haven't taken it yet because everything isn't just quite right yet, everything isn't just quite perfect yet? You want to take it, but you keep telling yourself, it's just not yet. Well, and it's more to do with what you're afraid of than it is really about moving towards that. But what is that? Because I think there's always a next step for any of us. Doesn't matter what your age is. Doesn't matter what your experience has been. There's always a next right step. But here's the second question I want to ask today, and that's this. What's the next right step for us as a community of believers here? What's the next right step for us going forward? Where should we be going? What should we be doing? How should we be thinking about things? And I want to share an idea that we've come up with. The pastoral staff has prayed about this, talked about this a lot. We've talked with our lay pastors. We've talked with a number of other people about this. And here's where we feel that God is taking us on our next step. So the next right step has to do with three things. Has to do with dots. Say dots. Spots. And lots. All right, let's talk about spots for a moment. we have something that happens every Sabbath morning while those of you at first service are here, that happens directly at the time you're here. For those that will come to second service, also happens again for them, but in a little bit different setting. You have this live, you see me live. There are people right now watching online live. And we have recognized that there are people all around this country, all around this world, that consider this space, this place, their church. And we've talked about this, and we've thought about that, and while on one side we say we wish they could find something locally where they could have some community, we also recognize that that isn't always possible in some of the places people are. We also recognize that New Hope is a unique place. How many of you visited other churches over the holidays? Anybody else have that wonderful joy? I was in 2 other churches. I'm so happy to be at New Hope. And I don't say that mockingly towards them. There's something special about this place. And we've begun to recognize there's something special because there are people that identify with us who come down once every month, once every 6 weeks. We have people that come down from Massachusetts. We have people that come down from New Jersey and New York. We have people that come down from Pennsylvania. We have people who every week come up from Northern Virginia. Every week. I have an hour to 15 minutes, hour and a half, and have done it for decades. And so we've recognized that there's something about this place. And it's more than just one person or even a handful of people. It's something about who we are as a group. And we've decided we ought to honor that. And to do that, we want to say, hey, if you have self-recognized and chosen New Hope because you watch us all the time, we want to formalize that. And we're going to be talking about that more over the next few weeks. But here's something I want you to think about. Here's some statistics. Last Sabbath, we have 2 live feeds. We do one on Facebook, one through our website. On our Facebook, we had 419 views, 419 people who watched our worship service last week. And 195 engagements. Engagements are that they said, They posted it on their own Facebook page. They commented on it. They put a like. They said, send it to a friend to say, hey, you ought to watch this. On our website, we had 78 views. You put those together, and it's a little over, right around 500. That's 500 viewers. That doesn't mean, in those cases, more than one person's watching. So last week, we had at least 500 people who were watching us here. Week before, 413 views, 150 engagements, 61. It's about 474 people. The week before, 463, 235, 57, about 500 and something. There's a mathematician when you need him, right? But you look at that and it tells you something. At least it tells me something. That there's a lot of people out there who have some kind of connection with God through this place. And we ought to do something about that. I'm going to give you some other information. I've been watching over the last few years. Every Monday I get a report in my email that tells me where people watched from. And occasionally we get people from all over the place. We get people sometimes from Brazil. We get people from the Philippines. We get people from England. But there's also some people that when I see them watching, 2, 3, 4 more regularly, and I go, I ought to look at that. So here's some people that in the last month, these are places that people have tuned in more than just one time, all right? We had Montreal, Quebec, Canada. All right. We had some folks in Puerto Rico, hola. Some people from Johannesburg, South Africa. Hello, I don't know what, we have to ask ourselves, I don't know what this, some people in Newton, Connecticut, Huntsville, Alabama, that's Andrew. Hey, Andrew, how you doing today? Here's around here, Washington, D.C., Melbourne, Florida, Miami, Florida. I got to tell you about the person in Miami, Florida. I don't know who they are, but I just want to say welcome to you today. Glad that you're tuning in today. This person has been watching us for quite a long time. In fact, remember, I think it was, it's been quite a while ago, when the hurricane hit Miami, quite a while ago, right? It was hitting on the weekend, hitting on Sabbath morning down there. On Sabbath morning, a person in Miami was watching us while the hurricane was swirling all around them. That tells me something. I don't know what it tells you. It tells me something about this person feels some kind of connection with us, all right? Maryland, we got tons of people in Maryland. Arnold, Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, Brookville, Maryland, Capitol Heights, Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, Elk Ridge, Maryland, Ellicott City, Maryland, Gwynn Oak, Maryland, Hagerstown, Maryland, Hyattsville, Maryland, Laurel, Maryland, Odenton, Maryland, Olney Mills, Maryland, Onings Mills, Maryland, Rockville, Maryland, Severn, Maryland, Silver Spring, Maryland, another folk from Massachusetts, Berrien Springs, Michigan, Brooklyn, New York, Greensville, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Cypress, Texas. Love this family from Cypress, Texas. We actually came up a couple of summers ago. We did their family dedication here. And the reason we did it here is because this is their home. This is their church. They used to live in Katy, Texas. They've apparently moved in the last few months. They're now in Cypress. Every week we see them from Cypress. Harrisburg, Virginia, Chicago, Illinois, and there's a number of other ones. I share all that information just simply to say that what we do here is bigger than us. And we want to honor that. We want to validate what people have self-chosen. And so, those of you who want to look in this camera, because this is our online camera better, if you want to connect with us, if you want to become a New Hope dot, and a dot is that little thing on the left side. You may just be yourself watching someplace. We just want to make that connection. Let us know where you're at. Give us your name, and we want to say, hey, this is a New Hope dot here. If you get some more people that are coming, you invite some friends, you get to be a little bit bigger dot. If you get to the place that you got too many people to be in your house, that dot, we have another option for you, and that's to become a spot. And we will help you. We'll help you find a space. We'll find a place in a bank, find a place in a community center, find a place in a hotel in your community. We'll help you get internet lined up there. We'll help you get a TV. We will be glad to broadcast this thing in there because we see value in this. And if we can help expand that, we want to do that. In fact, we already have some ideas for spots. We're thinking about Fort Meade. Fort Meade is an underserved area, underserved population in our area. So if you're in the military, anybody in the military, see me later. I'd love to have a conversation with you about what that might look like. Baltimore City, a place that just needs Jesus in a dramatic way. And I don't say that pejoratively. I don't say that as it just, we got to see God do something there to change people's hearts so that their lives change. Shady Grove Hospital, we're in discussions right now with getting in there and showing our service every week on Saturdays and Sundays there, and maybe doing some other pieces over there. Pennsylvania, if you're in the house today, Pennsylvania, let me know, and we'll have some discussions about what that might look like up there. Lastly, it's our lots. And our lots are simply this idea of connections. We want to become a resource church. And when I say resource, it's not about, hey, we're going to send you, $100,000 over here and there, but the idea that we'd love to share some things that we've learned, things that we've learned not to do, things we've learned that seem to work, some systems, some intellectual things, some programs and stuff. So we already have a church in New York City that we've, for a number of years. In fact, I think Kumar went back when you were pastor here that started that connection, and we've had a connection going on with them. GRC is the Global Resource Collective. It's a group of churches all around the world that has just begun this last year that we've become part of to try to help make this work. I tell you all this for a very simple reason. We have to figure out what the next right step is, and we believe this is the next right step for us. And just like those people that stood at the edge of that river, especially like the very first priests and Levites, somebody's got to put their foot in the water and see if God's really behind this. And so we're willing to risk that and to see if that's where this is going to take, what may take place out of this. There's another next right step. It has to do with space. And you know that we seem at times in first service here especially that we're running out of space. And let me tell you what we're going to do about that. You need to be here next week. That's what you need to do about that, because we're going to talk about that next week. Everybody go, oh, that was bad, right? Here's our idea. We want to commit to doing something that is destined to failure unless God is a part of it. Because I'll be honest with you, I am wired to be very conservative and very cautious. You can ask my wife, I'm very fiscally sound. It's just exactly what it sounds like. So I'm not a great risk taker. But I think there are times that we have to risk. We have to look like the people that Joshua talked to. That this is how God is going to show up and show himself by doing something, by us taking that first step. And so we're committing to this idea as something that really is destined to failure because it has just a lot of landmines around. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the denomination, this won't make a lot of people happy because you're going across boundaries and that. And the reality is, we've already gone across boundaries. People have self-selected, and so how do you tell people who say, I like you, that you can't like them? So what if? Let's get back to us in this room and watching online. What if God is waiting on you to take the next right step? What if that's the reason that how you'd like things to be? It's just waiting for you to move that way, to have the faith to say, I'm going to lean that way, I'm going to start moving that. What if God is waiting on you to take the next right step? And what if you can't and won't know what God could do and would do for you and in you if you don't? Because you won't and you can't. Often God only shows up when we've made that step, when we've leaned into that. And my prayer for you is that you'll take that step. Whatever that step looks like for your life. Whether it's in a relationship, and maybe you know it's not great and they know it's not great, and somebody needs to say, not just, hey, we need to have a talk, but somebody needs to say, I made a call, I've got an appointment, and let's go give this a shot. Maybe it's your finances, and maybe you're in debt, you don't know how to get out of it. You know, we have kicking off here in just a week or two, a Financial Peace University, great program. Costs some money, but it's worth it, yeah. It's an investment, and maybe that's the step you need to take. You know, maybe it's in your faith journey with God. Maybe it's something that you know you need to say yes to or no to, but you just can't because you couldn't. And I just want to challenge you that if you want to see God show up, sometimes you got to take that first step. And so my hope is you'll take that first step. I love this quote by a lady named Sheryl Sandberg. She's a smart businesswoman, has written a lot of stuff. I love the statement that if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, do not ask what seat. I mean, it's a rocket ship, right? And so I hope that you'll join us in this rocket ship and see where it takes us. Hopefully it won't explode before it takes off. And our goal is that everybody goes and comes back safely. But hey, if you'd like to be part of, you have some ideas about it, I welcome you talking to me. I already had somebody this morning talking to me about being part of this and helping out in some way. We would love to engage with you and do that. So, next right step, come back next week and we'll talk about it, all right?